Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's U.S. History 5-Minute Lectures. This information will be U.S. Notes 3.2, The World Reacts to Dictators. It includes information aligned with the first section on your Unit 3 study guide. Now remember, you control this lecture. Pause if you need to, write down questions you have in notes, and rewatch as much as you need. And always make sure you're using your study guide to help you take notes. Let's go ahead and get started. In the last set of notes, you heard about the different dictators that took over Europe and Asia. So what did the rest of the world do about these guys? The rise of dictatorships and militarism did upset many Americans. These ideas are contrary to American ideals, and it made them feel as if World War I had meant nothing. We had fought to end empires and to support democracy, and these guys and groups were coming in and destroying every gain that we had made. Americans felt that war was not the answer. Instead, they turned further inward and became even more isolationist and uninvolved in the rest of the world. Americans supported isolationism for different reasons. Some felt this was the best policy to keep us out of war. Others felt that Europe was not our concern. They had stopped paying war debts due to their depressions, and so they needed to deal with their problems themselves, so we just didn't want to get involved. They weren't helping us. Why should we continue to help them? That was the attitude of many Americans. And finally, many Americans were questioning why we went to war in the first place in 1917 if nothing had changed. Was it just so companies could make money off the war? People were disillusioned and wanted to concentrate on the U.S. and on fixing our problems. So Congress realized that many Americans wanted neutrality as issues arose in Europe and Asia. They actually even tried to legislate this neutrality through a series of laws throughout the 1930s. These acts, the Neutrality Acts of 1935, Neutrality Act of 1937, and the Neutrality Act of 1939, did things like ban sales of arms to countries at war and required a cash and carry policy towards non-military supplies. Cash and carry means that the country paid cash up front for the supplies, they were not given credit, and that the other country actually transported the goods on their ships, that's the carry part, not on U.S. ships. These did last a few years, but ultimately they were unsuccessful in keeping America uninvolved in foreign affairs. In Asia, Japan continued its aggressive invasions of other territories. Throughout the 30s, Japan attacked areas along the Chinese coast, and by 1941 controlled nearly all of that area. They had also taken over Korea, French Indochina, parts of the Philippines, and other islands. And you can see on the map all these areas that Japan took over. The U.S. reaction to Japanese actions was different than the one in Europe. While the U.S. still wanted to remain neutral, they couldn't just let nothing happen. So they did things like they froze Japanese assets in the U.S., which meant that the Japanese could not access money or goods that were in the U.S. that were theirs. We also placed an oil embargo on Japan, refusing to trade oil to them. The hope was that these economic actions would hurt Japan enough to stop their actions. So we responded with economics, not military action. Instead, they became more aggressive and determined to gain their own oil reserves and empire. As time went on, problems overseas increased. Dictators made alliances with one another, and that gave them even more power. In 1936, Francisco Franco and his fascist party began a civil war in Spain. Hitler and Mussolini backed Franco because they had very similar beliefs against the Spanish government that existed. These leaders, particularly Hitler and Mussolini, signed an agreement to cooperate on several different issues. It was called the Rome-Berlin Axis. And about a month later, Japan joined this group, which made the group, the three, the Axis powers. These leaders gained total control of their countries by creating totalitarian dictatorships. They made alliances with one another, threatening the security of neighboring nations. As these dictators became more aggressive and invaded other areas for economic and military gains, the rest of the world tried desperately to avoid war. They failed. So this is the end of Notes 3.2. Hopefully you learned something, and I'll see you in class with any questions you have.